In 2021, scientists accomplished something that seemed impossible. 3.5 meters deep in the permafrost of Yakutia, they found something that completely upended our understanding of the boundary between life and death. It began as a completely ordinary excavation, a scientific expedition, laboratory work, standard procedures. But what they recovered from the ancient ice left even experienced researchers stunned. An organism the size of a needlehead, so small it could only be seen under a microscope. But when the scientists thawed the sample, something amazing happened. The organism sprang back to life. Frozen in the ice for 24,000 years, the tiny creature shook itself and began moving, as if it had just woken up from an ordinary sleep. But that was just the beginning of the real miracle. The baldroid, as this microscopic marvel is called, not only came back to life, but it immediately began reproducing. Without a partner, without mating, it simply created exact copies of itself. Imagine this, an organism that slept when mammoths and saber-toothed tigers roamed the earth, waking up in the age of smartphones and space travel, but its small size is deceptive. Under a microscope, this creature is incredibly complex. It has a brain, a digestive system, muscles, and reproductive organs. It's a complete organism squeezed into something smaller than a grain of sand. It's like encasing an entire city in a flake of salt. Rotifers get their name from their peculiar way of locomotion. They spin tiny, invisible wheels around their mouths, creating whirlpools to catch food. These wheel-drawing animals were first discovered in the late 17th century, but their abilities still amaze scientists today. The secret to their survival lies in a state called cryptobiosis. Imagine an organism that temporarily suspends its life. Its metabolism shuts down so completely that modern instruments can no longer detect any sign of life. No pulse, no breathing. But that's not death. It's something between life and death, a kind of suspended animation. In this state, rotifers become almost invincible. Complete dehydration? No problem. Scientists removed every drop of water from the rotifers' bodies, turning them into dry dust. Years later, a single drop of water was enough to bring them back to life. Cosmic radiation? No problem. Temperatures near absolute zero? No problem. NASA and the European Space Agency sent these creatures into space on space stations. The results shocked everyone. They survived the vacuum, weightlessness, and radiation 1,000 times more intense than what we experience on Earth. In 2007, thousands of rotifers were launched into low Earth orbit in special containers. For 10 days, they floated silently in the empty space and were exposed to ultraviolet radiation that would have instantly killed any other living thing. When the containers returned to Earth, most of the rotifers simply shook themselves off and carried on as if nothing had happened. But how do they do it? The key lies in special proteins called chaperones. When extreme conditions strike, these tiny protectors surround critical parts of the cell and prevent it from disintegrating. These chaperones act as microscopic repair teams, repairing damage at the molecular level. Even more astonishing is that rotifers are able to repair their DNA after it's been completely destroyed by radiation. Their genome can be cut into hundreds of pieces, but special enzymes patiently reassemble it like a puzzle. Scientists don't yet fully understand how this is possible. Rotifers have another amazing trait. They've learned to steal. Not gold or jewelry, they steal genes. Up to 10% of their DNA comes from genetic material borrowed from bacteria, fungi, and plants. This is called horizontal gene transfer. When the cells of other organisms degrade, rotifers pick up useful genetic instructions and insert them into their own DNA. A radiation resistance gene from a bacterium like Deinococcus radiodurans? No problem. The ability to break down toxic chemicals from plants? No problem. Cold resistance genes from Arctic fish? They take those too. They rebuild themselves like biological Lego pieces, adding useful abilities from other life forms. This kind of evolutionary theft has helped them evolve into near-immortal superorganisms. However, the most shocking discovery came when scientists compared rotifers to their closest relatives, tardigrades. These water bears are also known for their ability to survive in harsh conditions, but rotifers outdid even them. Tardigrades can remain in a state of cryptobiosis for up to 30 years. Rotifers, tens of thousands of years. In laboratory experiments, rotifers were subjected to things that would kill thousands of human generations. They were X-rayed, frozen in liquid nitrogen, and even heated to boiling point. Most survived and continued to reproduce. This defies all the rules of evolution. Typically, species that reproduce without mating die out quickly because they lack genetic diversity. But rotifers have existed for millions of years and have diverged into more than 450 species. Under normal conditions, these creatures live only a few weeks, but when exposed to extreme situations, they become virtually immortal. You can freeze them, dry them out, bombard them with radiation, and they'll wait for better times, even for 1,000,000 years. And that's where things get really exciting. Research into rotifers has led to a breakthrough that could change the future of humanity. Scientists realized if a tiny creature can sleep for tens of thousands of years and wake up unharmed, why not try the same thing with humans? For the first time in history, we have a tangible path to immortality. Not poetic or symbolic immortality, but actual physical immortality through cryogenic freezing. Rotifers have shown us that the secret isn't to stop the aging process, but to stop time in the body. Their accompanying proteins have become the subject of intense research. If we can reproduce their effects in human cells, the possibilities are endless. Imagine, a person with a terminal illness is placed in biofreezing until a cure is found. This could happen in 10, 100, or 1,000 years, for them, it will feel like a moment. Astronauts could sleep through long journeys to distant stars. Humans could survive disasters that befall our planet by sleeping through them in safe shelters. The first experiments have already begun. Several biotech companies in the United States and Japan are working on synthetic chaperone proteins for human cells. Others are investigating horizontal gene transfer, inserting bits of rotifer DNA into the human genome to make us more resilient to harsh conditions. Of course, we are still a long way from making this practical. The human body is billions of times more complex than a rotifer. But the fact that nature has already solved the problem of true immortality gives us hope. Rotifers also challenge our ideas about the origin of life. Their ability to survive in space supports the ancient theory of panspermia, the idea that life may have traveled between planets, hiding in meteorites or cosmic dust. Perhaps our early ancestors arrived on Earth frozen and traveled through space on chunks of ice for billions of years. Perhaps one day we will travel to other planets, traveling across worlds by harnessing the cryptobiosis of these tiny rotifers. The discovery in the frozen wastes of Yakutia was a turning point in human history. For the first time, we no longer had just a theory of immortality, but a practical, living example. If a microscopic creature could sleep for 24,000 years and then wake up as if nothing had happened, then the border between life and death could be crossed. Perhaps within a few decades, cryopreservation would become as commonplace as heart surgery is today, and all thanks to a tiny creature that taught us the greatest secret in the universe: how to outsmart time. But the rotifer wasn't the only amazing discovery hidden in the ice. In September 1991, German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were hiking in the Utztal Alps when they stumbled upon what they initially thought was the body of a mountaineer who had been in an accident. It was Ötzi, a man who had stepped straight from the Copper Age into the 21st century. Initial examinations revealed something incredible. The body was 5,300 years old. Ötzi died at a time when humans were just beginning to work with metal, and the pyramids of Egypt had yet to be built. The glacial ice had preserved him so perfectly that scientists were able to reconstruct his life with forensic accuracy. Ötzi, it turned out, was the victim of the oldest solved murder in human history. A flint arrowhead was embedded in his shoulder, but that was just the beginning. The wounds on his hands showed he had fought for his life. Scientists found the blood of 4 different people on his clothing and weapons, a true Bronze Age massacre. Forensic experts reconstructed the events with terrifying accuracy. On one arrowhead, they found the blood of 2 different people, meaning that Ötzi had wounded or killed 2 attackers with a single arrow. Blood from a 3rd person was found on torn clothing. The 4th bloodstain came from Ötzi himself. This prehistoric man's last meal consisted of wild goat meat, bread, and bracken. Using the pollen in his stomach, scientists were able to determine not only the season, late spring or early summer, but also that he had descended into a valley just 200 meters above sea level 2 days before his death. Isotopic analysis of his tooth enamel revealed even more surprising facts. Ötzi was born and raised in the Isak Valley, about 60 kilometers from where he died. However, hair analysis revealed that he had traveled extensively between mountains and valleys during the last months of his life. His hair contained high levels of copper and arsenic, a clear sign that Ötzi worked with metals. He may have been a smelter or blacksmith, and thus an important and extremely wealthy figure in his time. At that time, copper was more valuable than gold. One of the most astonishing discoveries was Ötzi's tattoos. His body bore 61 marks, thin lines carved not with a needle, but with tiny incisions and charcoal. However, what particularly shocked researchers was the placement of these tattoos. They were precisely located at the acupuncture points used today in traditional Chinese medicine. This means that 5,000 years ago, acupuncture may have been practiced in the Alps to treat joint pain. Ötzi suffered from arthritis. His joints were severely worn down, unsurprising for a 45-year-old man who spent a lot of time in the mountains. Ötzi also carried a kind of first aid kit. In his pocket were pieces of birch fungus, a natural antibiotic still used by traditional healers today. Seeds and leaves of medicinal plants were also found. This ancient man possessed healing skills. His clothing displayed incredible ingenuity and design. A bearskin hat with leather straps protected him from the wind. His goatskin cloak was made of colorful strips sewn together in an intricate pattern, not just clothing, but a work of art. The high socks, the apron, even the grass socks, each item was functional and well designed. His shoes were masterpieces of ancient craftsmanship. The soles were made of bearskin, the uppers were made of deerskin, and the inside was insulated with straw and lined with grass cloth for ventilation. They were ideal for hiking on alpine trails. The most valuable piece, however, was a 60-centimeter-long copper axe with a wooden handle. This was advanced technology for the time. Metal analysis revealed a surprise. The copper came from southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers away. This suggested established trade routes, or that Ötzi himself was a merchant dealing in metals. However, the most surprising discovery came in 2019. Using state-of-the-art technology, Italian researchers were able to reconstruct Ötzi's voice. They created a 3D model of his larynx and vocal cords, taking into account the size of his chest cavity and nasal passages. It turned out that this ancient man's voice sounded remarkably modern, a deep baritone between 100 and 150 hertz, just like the average person today. When the scientists played the audio, many listeners got goosebumps. For the first time in 5,000 years, a Stone Age man was speaking. DNA analysis revealed more surprises. Ötzi had brown eyes, dark hair, and tanned skin. He was lactose intolerant, had a genetic predisposition to heart disease, and was probably bald. Scientists found DNA from the bacteria that causes Lyme disease in his blood, making him the oldest known case in history. The most shocking discovery: Ötzi had living relatives. Geneticists found 19 men in present-day Tyrol who are direct descendants of Ötzi on his paternal side. Their ancestor died 5,000 years ago, but his lineage lives on. Sadly, Ötzi's story is shrouded in strange coincidences. Since his discovery, several people connected to his research have died under strange circumstances. Helmut Simon, who found Ötzi, froze to death in the same mountains in 2004. His body was found in the same position as the Iceman's. Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide, died in an avalanche. Rainer Hülsla, the only journalist who filmed the mummy's recovery, died of a brain tumor. Helmut Simon died during a snowstorm, in the same spot where Ötzi was found 13 years earlier. Konrad Spindler, the archaeologist who led the search, died of a rare disease at the age of 65. In just 20 years, 7 people connected to the discovery died. Journalists dubbed it Ötzi's curse and compared it to the mythical curse of the pharaohs. Statistically, it may have been a coincidence, but the mystical aura surrounding the Iceman only intensified. Forensic experts were able to reconstruct Ötzi's final days with detective precision. 2 days before his death, he had descended into a ravine and become involved in a violent altercation. Wounded, he climbed back up the mountains, perhaps to escape his pursuers or to accomplish an important mission. At an altitude of 3,200 meters, his assassin caught up with him. An arrow struck him in the back below the shoulder blade, piercing his lung and damaging vital blood vessels. Ötzi bled to death within minutes. The assassin did not take. He even had the precious copper axe with him, either because he was in a hurry or because he feared being hunted down. The body quickly froze and was buried under snow, which turned to ice, preserving the evidence for thousands of years. Ötzi became a kind of cryogenic time capsule, transporting the story of life and death from the Stone Age to the modern world. Ötzi's discovery completely changed our understanding of the inhabitants of the Copper Age. They were not primitive cave dwellers, but people with advanced medicine, complex technology, far-reaching trade networks, and a rich culture. And sadly, just like us, they also knew how to kill each other. The Iceman became a symbol of how little human nature has changed over the millennia. Love and hate, greed and generosity, knowledge and superstition, all of this existed in the Alpine valleys 5,000 years ago. If the rotifer astounded us with its ability to revive after tens of thousands of years in the ice, virtually immortalized by cryptobiosis, Ötzi astounded the world with the astonishing details of human history frozen in time. However, subsequent discoveries would shock scientists not only with individual stories of survival, but with the potential to revive entire extinct species. In May 2007, a reindeer herder named Yuri Kudi made an astonishing discovery in the upper reaches of the Uribi River, the perfectly preserved carcass of a baby mammoth. The young female was named Liuba after the discoverer's wife. But the story of this discovery was no less dramatic than the fate of the baby mammoth itself. Liuba died some 42,000 years ago at just 1 month old. She was so exceptionally well preserved that even her eyelashes and tiny ear hairs were intact. She weighed 30 kilograms and stood 90 centimeters tall, about the size of a large dog with short legs and a long snout. Yuri Kudi immediately recognized the value of the find. But in keeping with Nenet's beliefs, he did not touch the mammoth with his bare hands. Instead, he consulted a friend and notified the authorities. When he returned with a helicopter and a team of scientists, Liuba had disappeared. What followed was a true detective story. While Cody was getting help, Another man found the mammoth and simply brought it to a nearby village called Noviport. There, he dumped it next to a local store, like a garbage bag. Neighborhood dogs began gnawing at the body, biting off Lyuba's right ear and part of her tail before residents realized what a foreign object it actually was. Fortunately, the damage was mostly superficial. Her internal organs, skeleton, and most of her body remained intact. When Lyuba was finally taken to the lab, researchers revealed the tragic story of her death. Her mouth and airways were clogged with mud and silt. She had fallen into a muddy ditch and drowned. She had likely strayed from the herd and tried to drink from a swampy puddle, but her short legs couldn't keep her steady on the slippery bank. Stomach contents showed she was still breastfeeding but had just begun to taste solid food. Vegetable remains were found in her intestines. She was a healthy, well-fed calf with a pronounced bulge of fat on her neck, a natural energy reserve for surviving the cold. 3 years later, an even more startling discovery surprised Lyuba. In 2010, mammoth ivory hunters in Yakutia found Yuka, a mammoth cub, about 6 to 8 years old, who had died 28,000 years ago. Yuka shocked scientists with an unexpected surprise. At first glance, her body was hollow. Most of her internal organs, many bones, and much of her muscle were missing. Someone or something had carefully butchered the carcass, like a skilled butcher. Claw marks and bite marks from a cave lion were found on her skin, but what was striking were the clean wounds that could only have been made by human hands. The wounds followed precise anatomical lines, proving that the ancient butcher had an excellent knowledge of mammoth anatomy. For the first time, scientists had clear evidence that early humans hunted mammoths. The reconstructed scene was as follows. Cave lions chased the young mammoth into a swampy area where it became stuck. Then Stone Age hunters arrived and killed the wounded animal. They slaughtered him immediately, taking everything of value, the meat, fat, organs, and even the bone marrow. What they couldn't carry, they left behind, the skin, bones, and some muscle tissue. The body sank into the swamp, where preserved for thousands of years by permafrost. The most astonishing discovery, however, awaited inside Yuka's skull, her brain, the first single mammoth brain ever found intact. Brain tissue is composed of 90% water and fat, and therefore rarely lasts for thousands of years. This was nothing short of a miracle. Not only was the brain preserved, but it was remarkably well preserved. Scientists were able to distinguish certain structures, examine neural connections, and even take tissue samples for DNA analysis. Japanese researchers at Kindai University succeeded in extracting cells with intact nuclei from Yuka's bone marrow and muscle tissue. This seemed impossible, as the nuclei would have degraded after thousands of years. But when these ancient cells were transplanted into mouse eggs that had had their nuclei removed, something miraculous happened. 21% of the mammoth's cells began developing into pre-mitotic cells, and for the first time in 28,000 years, mammoth cells came back to life and attempted to reproduce. These cells responded to modern biochemical signals and behaved like living cells. This discovery suddenly transformed mammoth cloning from science fiction to scientific possibility. If these ancient cells can be reactivated, they contain enough information to recreate an entire organism. Lyuba and Yuka have become symbols of one of the most ambitious biological projects in history, the resurrection of extinct species. South Korean scientists have announced plans to clone a mammoth by 2026. The American company Colossal Biosciences has raised $75 million to bring mammoths back to life. Thanks to the modern CRISPR gene editing technique, researchers can insert mammoth DNA into the genome of an Asian elephant with surgical precision. Embryos have already been created bearing genes responsible for thick fur, cold resistance, ear shape, and other mammoth traits. Scientist Sergei Zimov has gone even further. In Yakutia, He has established a Pleistocene park, a vast area where he is attempting to restore a pristine ecosystem to the mammoth steppe. The park is now home to Yakut horses, reindeer, and musk oxen, all animals that once lived alongside mammoths. Zimov proved something remarkable. When large herbivores trample the snow, the ground freezes deeper. Grass grows better, and the permafrost doesn't melt. Mammoths could become a living weapon against global warming. An adult mammoth weighed 6 tons and ate 300 kilograms of vegetation a day. A herd of 1,000 mammoths could level the snow across vast expanses of tundra, preventing the permafrost from melting and releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Discoveries in Siberia have shown that mammoths were not just giant elephants, but living ecosystem engineers, helping to maintain the balance of entire continents. In winter, they leveled the snow so that light could reach the grass beneath. In summer, they fertilized the soil and spread seeds through their feces. However, the Resurrection Project raises thorny ethical questions. Is it right to bring back species already abandoned by nature? Where would the cloned mammoths live? How would they adapt to existing ecosystems? Some scientists warn that resurrected mammoths could be genetic monsters. They could be hybrids of ancient and modern DNA that couldn't survive in the wild. Others argue that the money would be better spent saving currently endangered species that are on the verge of extinction. Nevertheless, proponents of the project believe that we should bring mammoths back to life if possible. Liuba and Yucca aren't just museum pieces. They are seeds of the future, frozen in time, waiting for their moment. Perhaps in just a few decades, mammoths will once again roam the Arctic tundra. Children will see this not in museums, but in the wild. It all began with the tragic story of little Liuba, who drowned in a muddy pit 42,000 years ago. Little did she know that one day she would be the key to reviving her species. But it's not just prehistoric creatures that find refuge in the ice. Sometimes the cold also preserves human tragedies, turning them into time capsules that tell terrifying stories about the price of human ambition. In May 1845, Sir John Franklin set sail from London to search for a sea route from the Atlantic to the Pacific via the Canadian Arctic. He commanded 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. On board were 129 of the Royal Navy's best sailors, 3 years' worth of rations, and the most modern equipment of the time. It was the voyage of a lifetime. The ships were reinforced with steel plates to cross the ice and equipped with steam engines and heating systems. The onboard library contained 200 books, including works by Dickens and scientific journals. There was even an organ for Sunday services, but all that disappeared without a trace. The last time Europeans saw Franklin's ships was in August 1845 in Baffin Bay. After that, there was deafening silence. The expedition seemed to have disappeared into the Arctic ice, leaving behind only questions and legends. For more than a century, search parties scoured the Arctic, spending far more money than the original expedition had cost. They found only grim remains, boxes labeled with ships' names, scraps of clothing, and human bones with bite marks. The Inuit told horrific stories of pale men wandering the ice and eating each other. They spoke of mummified bodies in blue uniforms scattered across Arctic islands. But Europeans long dismissed these wild stories as nonsense. The fate of the Franklin expedition became one of the greatest mysteries of the Age of Discovery, inspiring dozens of books, films, and conspiracy theories. Some claimed the sailors were killed by the Inuit. Others believed they had found the passage and settled somewhere in the Pacific. Then, in September 2016, something incredible happened. Canadian researchers discovered the HMS Terror in the waters of Terror Bay off the coast of King William Island, 100 kilometers from where the Inuit had last seen the ship in 1848. The ship was in near-perfect condition at a depth of 24 meters. The icy Arctic waters, which remain almost frozen year-round, acted as a natural freezer. Even the wooden masts stood erect, as if the ship had just dropped anchor. When underwater archaeologists first set foot on the wreck, they were met with a scene resembling something from a horror movie. In the officers' mess, tables were set for dinner. Plates, cutlery, and even napkins were still in place. The beds in the cabins were meticulously made from army blankets. The officers' desks were crammed with documents, maps, and unsent personal letters. Inkwells, quill pens, and books from the ship's library. Everything looked as if the crew had left ship only yesterday. In the cabins, they found intact supplies of canned goods, medical instruments, and scientific equipment for measuring the Earth's magnetic field. Even the glassware and bottles remained intact. The horror had become an underwater museum of the Victorian era. Most disturbing, however, was that the ship had been carefully sealed. All hatches were closed, cabins tidy, and valuables packed away. The sailors hadn't abandoned ship in a panic. They proceeded methodically and prepared for a long voyage through the ice. 2 years later, the second ship, HMS Erebus, was found. It was located 50 kilometers south and was also in remarkably good condition. The guns were still on the deck, ready for battle. In the holds were mountains of coal for the steam engines, which never reached their destination. These discoveries have allowed researchers to reconstruct the tragic final years of the expedition. The ships became completely frozen in the ice in Victoria Strait in September 1846. The crew hoped that the ice would melt in the summer of 1847 so they could continue their journey. But the Arctic summer was unusually cold. Sir John Franklin died on June 11, 1847. The cause of death is unknown. It may have been a heart attack or lead poisoning from tinned food. Command was then taken over by Captain Francis Crozier, an experienced polar explorer who realized the ships were doomed. On April 22, 1848, after nearly 2 years of being trapped in the ice, the 105 surviving sailors abandoned the ship. They left the ships and set off on foot for Back River, the nearest place they could find a rescue party. It was a 400-kilometer journey across ice and tundra. They pulled the boats on sleds, carrying food, weapons, and even cutlery and books, items completely useless for survival in the Arctic. As true Victorian gentry, they couldn't have imagined that this very courtesy would prove their undoing. What followed was a tragedy that would have frightened even Dante. Supplies dwindled rapidly. Scurvy turned the men into walking skeletons. Wounds wouldn't heal, teeth fell out, and gangrene set in. One by one, they began to die. Analysis of bones found along their route revealed tooth marks. The sailors had indeed eaten their fallen comrades. The Victorian press always dismissed these malicious rumors, but the scientific evidence was conclusive. The most gruesome scene unfolded on King William Island. There was a mass grave containing the bones of 11 men. Skull fragments bore axe marks, and long bones bore knife wounds. This wasn't random cannibalism born of a madman. Someone had methodically dismembered the bodies. The last surviving groups reached the mainland, but their strength was spent. For decades, the Inuit continued to find mummified bodies, preserved by the cold and buried in decaying British naval uniforms. None of the 129 members of Franklin's expedition survived. Their remains were scattered hundreds of kilometers across the Arctic islands. Some of the bodies were so well preserved that modern scientists were able to determine the cause of death. The primary cause of the disaster was lead poisoning. At the time, cans were sealed with lead solder, which leached into the food. Hair analysis revealed lead levels 100 times higher than normal. This led to hallucinations, delusions, and mental breakdowns. HMS Terror became a symbol of human resilience and tragic failure. These men ventured deeper into the Arctic, more than anyone before them. They discovered new lands and collected valuable scientific data, but they paid for it with their lives. Their ships became monuments to humanity's spirit of discovery, preserved in the ice for centuries. Everything on board tells a story of hope and fear, courage and despair, and the fine line between heroism and madness. The Northwest Passage sought by Franklin wasn't fully navigated until 1906 by Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. Today, due to global warming, the same route is a regular trade route. The Terror and Erebus found their final resting place in the icy waters of the Arctic, but their story still haunts us. They remind us that behind every great discovery is a human life, and that nature does not forgive arrogance, even in the bravest explorers. In August 2014, Yakut mammoth ivory hunters Semyon Ivanov and his son Zhenya were working on the banks of the Semyulakh River when they came across what they initially thought was a tree trunk protruding from the permafrost. However, as they began to dig around the object, it became clear it wasn't wood. It was something far more valuable. They had discovered a perfectly preserved baby woolly rhinoceros. The calf was named Sasha, the first and only complete carcass ever found of this legendary extinct animal. Previously, scientists had only bones and skin fragments to study. Sasha died 39,000 years ago at just a month and a half old, yet he looked as if he had fallen asleep only yesterday. His skin, ears, tail, thick reddish-brown fur, and even the small folds of skin on his limbs were intact. He weighed just 30 kilograms and was 120 centimeters tall, about the size of a large dog, but with short, stocky legs. At first glance, Sasha looked like a stuffed animal from the Ice Age. His small face was covered in soft down, his tiny eyes were tightly closed, and where a horn should have grown, only a small bump remained. Even his nose had retained its shape. The woolly rhinoceros was among the most impressive and mysterious animals of the Pleistocene epoch. Adults reach the size of modern white rhinos, up to 4 meters long, 2 meters tall, and weighing up to 3 tons. But unlike their African relatives, they were covered in thick fur up to 15 centimeters long. Their most striking feature was their massive front horn, which could reach an astonishing 2 meters in length. It wasn't made of bone, but of hard keratin, the same material as fingernails and hair. The horn grew throughout their lives and was used to scrape snow in search of grass. Cave paintings in the Chauvet Cave in France, created 30,000 years ago, depict woolly rhinos in impressive detail. The ancient artists depicted them with remarkable accuracy, with thick fur, massive bodies, and a distinctive hump. Sasha's DNA analysis revealed an exciting surprise. It turned out that woolly rhinos represent an entirely separate evolutionary lineage that split off from modern rhinos about 50 million years ago. They evolved in isolation over millions of years to become truly unique creatures with no close relatives. This means that woolly rhinos were evolutionary relics, living fossils that preserved ancient traits long lost by other species. Their closest modern relatives are the Sumatran rhinoceros, but even they are more distant genetically from humans than from chimpanzees. An analysis of Sasha's stomach contents revealed his last meal. He was still breastfeeding but had already begun to taste solid food. Traces of young willow and dwarf birch shoots, plants typical of the tundra steppe ecosystem, were found in his gut. Pollen analysis of the surrounding sediments painted a picture of the world in which Sasha lived. 39,000 years ago, the climate was much harsher than it is today, but the area now known as Yakutia was not a barren tundra. It was a rich, grassy steppe. The woolly rhino lived in the so-called mammoth steppe, a unique ecosystem, stretching from Spain to Alaska and from the coasts of the Arctic Ocean to the Black Sea. These grasslands were incredibly productive, supporting a biomass of large herbivores 10 times greater than the African savanna today. Imagine endless plains covered in nutrient-rich grass, where herds of mammoths, bison, horses, and rhinoceroses grazed. Predators, cave lions, short-faced bears, and saber-toothed tigers hunted these giants. It was a world of both abundance and danger. Sasha died suddenly, possibly by falling into a river and drowning or being buried by an avalanche during a spring storm. Death came quickly. No mud was found in his lungs, meaning he didn't drown. His body was instantly frozen in the permafrost and has been preserved to this day. Isotopic analysis of his teeth revealed a fascinating detail. Sasha's mother migrated long distances in search of better pastures. The chemical composition of his tooth enamel changed depending on the water and plants she consumed. This created a kind of travel diary documenting the migrations of prehistoric rhinos. Woolly rhinos were not only great grazers, but also living landscape architects. In winter, they used their massive antlers to clear snow, uncover grass, and create feeding grounds for other animals. In summer, they broke through undergrowth, preventing the tundra from becoming forest. Their extinction about 10,000 years ago was part of the Great Pleistocene megafaunal extinction. With them disappeared mammoths, cave bears, saber-toothed cats, and giant deer. Within a few thousand years, an entire world of giants had vanished. Scientists still debate the causes of this extinction. There are three main theories: climate change, human hunting, and disease. Most likely, all factors played a role. At the end of the Pleistocene, the climate warmed rapidly. The lush steppes were replaced by swampy tundra and dense forests. The grasses that woolly rhinos fed on disappeared, giving way to mosses and shrubs. At the same time, humans arrived, skilled hunters with spears and bows. Cave paintings depict scenes of rhino hunting. Unfortunately, people at the time probably didn't realize they were wiping out the last remaining members of a species. The third theory is that diseases were introduced by domesticated animals. Recent research shows that large wild animals are particularly vulnerable to livestock-borne diseases. Sasha has become a symbol of the lost world of the Pleistocene. Looking at this young rhinoceros, it's easy to imagine how rich and diverse life on Earth was just 10,000 years ago. His discovery reminds us of how fragile ecosystems are, and how rapidly the entire world is disappearing. Today, only 5 rhino species remain, all of which are threatened with extinction. The northern white rhinoceros is almost extinct. Only 2 females remain, both of whom can no longer reproduce. The Javan rhino population numbers around 70 animals. Sadly, history is repeating itself. But Sasha gives us hope. Thanks to his exceptional preservation, scientists were able to obtain high-quality DNA from the woolly rhinoceros. Theoretically, cloning and gene editing techniques could bring this species back to life. Unlike mammoths, woolly rhinos have no close living relatives to serve as surrogate mothers. But science is advancing rapidly, and perhaps within a few decades, thanks to artificial wombs, it will be possible to reproduce the descendants of extinct animals. Sasha is more than just a museum exhibit. He's a message from a lost world, a reminder that our planet was once home to extraordinary creatures. And perhaps one day they'll return to Earth, thanks to a baby rhinoceros that has slept in the permafrost of Yakutia for 39,000 years. Not all glacial discoveries date back to ancient times. Sometimes the ice preserves stories that, historically, happened only yesterday, but that doesn't make them any less dramatic. On July 11, 1897, a huge hot air balloon called the Eagle rose into the gray Arctic sky from the island of Svalbard. In the basket were 3 Swedish explorers, Salomon August André, Niels Strindberg, and Knut Frankel. Their goal was so ambitious that many considered it madness to reach the North Pole by balloon. The expedition captured the attention of the entire world. André was an engineer, a renowned balloonist and inventor of numerous devices. André was absolutely convinced of the success of his adventure. He claimed that the journey to the pole would take only 43 hours, and the return trip even less. The Eagle was an engineering marvel in the 1890s. Its dome had a diameter of 20 meters and a volume of 4,800 cubic meters. making it one of the largest balloons of its time. The basket was equipped with the latest equipment: sleeping bags, a portable kitchen, scientific instruments, and even cameras to photograph the North Pole. Andre's most daring innovation was a system for steering the balloon using cable sails. He believed he could use wind currents at different altitudes for navigation. The theory sounded promising, but in practice, it was doomed from the start. They brought 4 months' worth of provisions. Andre not only wanted to reach the pole, but also to conduct a thorough scientific investigation. The basket contained canned goods, biscuits, chocolate, and even bottles of champagne to celebrate their success. Their scientific equipment included thermometers, barometers, cameras, and hundreds of glass balls containing messages to be dropped during the flight to report progress. But just 65 hours after launch, the dream turned into a nightmare. The guidance system failed, and the balloon drifted uncontrollably northward, gradually losing altitude. The basket repeatedly collided with floating ice, damaging the casing. Eventually, the Eagle landed on a floating ice floe 480 kilometers from the launch point. The researchers found themselves alone on the endless Arctic ice, with minimal equipment to survive. They faced months of fighting the elements, hunger, and bitter cold. For 33 years, the fate of the Andre expedition remained one of the greatest mysteries of Arctic exploration. Search teams found only scattered clues, some messages in glass balls, fragments of the balloon, and an old float labeled Andre Polar Expedition 1897. Then, on August 6, 1930, a Norwegian scientific expedition landed on the Isle of Wight to replenish their supply of fresh water. What they discovered shocked the world. The icy desert had preserved Andre's expedition camp with astonishing precision. A waterproof tent still stood, partly torn apart by the wind. Cooking utensils, pots and pans, canned food, and scientific instruments, everything was still in the same place as it had been 33 years earlier. Next to the camp lay the bodies of the 3 men. Andre was buried under a pile of stones. His companions had managed to give him a grave. Strindberg and Frankel lay in their sleeping bags as if they had fallen asleep peacefully and never woke up again. The expedition's diaries and cameras were among the most precious finds. Amazingly, the film was so well preserved that 240 photographs could be developed, documenting the last months of the explorers' lives. These images told an amazing story of heroic survival. The first pictures showed the optimistic trio next to their shattered balloon. Andre wearing a bowler hat and bow tie, Strindberg sporting a neat beard, and Frankel sporting a fur hat. They looked more like men out for a Sunday picnic than shipwrecked sailors. Later photographs documented their epic journey across the drifting sea ice. For 3 months, they traveled south, pulling sleds laden with supplies and a boat in case the ice broke. Their faces gradually became gaunt, and their clothes were torn and dirty. Diary entries, written in a shaky pencil hand, revealed the details of their struggle. After the accident, the team tried to reach land on foot. They hunted polar bears and seals, collected seabird eggs, and ate algae and seaweed to survive. Strindberg proved to be a skilled hunter. His rifle killed the game that saved the team from starvation. One photograph shows him proudly standing next to a dead polar bear weighing more than 300 kilograms. He fed them its meat for more than a week. But the Arctic was unforgiving. The ice floe they were traveling on was not drifting south toward land, but north, back to the North Pole. After a month of suffering, they found themselves further from rescue than when they had begun their journey. Strindberg's fate was particularly tragic. Not only was he the expedition's photographer, but he was also engaged. His fiancée, Anna Charlotta, was waiting for him at home. The diary contains letters he wrote to her, knowing she would probably never read them. "Dear Anna," he wrote on October 4th, 1897, "if these words ever reach you, know that my last thoughts are with you. We did all we could, but the Arctic was too strong for us. On October 7th, 1897, the expedition finally reached the Isle of Wight, a tiny piece of land measuring just 5 kilometers by 2 kilometers. They were still alive, exhausted and sick. It seemed the worst was over. The island might offer them a place to spend the winter in the hope of survival. The last diary entries are dated mid-October. The explorers built themselves a shelter of stones and canvas and stored polar bear meat for the winter. Strindberg even photographed their temporary dwelling, a low tomb-like stone structure. What happened next remains a mystery. They most likely died of trichiasis, a parasite found in undercooked polar bear meat, or perhaps carbon monoxide poisoning in the cramped quarters, or they may have simply frozen to death as the polar night fell. André was the first to die. His companions managed to bury him under rocks. Strindberg and Frankel died almost simultaneously in their sleeping bags. Their deaths were peaceful. Their faces showed no signs of agony. André's expedition lasted 129 days and covered over 1,000 kilometers of Arctic ice. They never reached the North Pole, but they accomplished one of the most heroic journeys in the history of Arctic exploration. Their photographs and diaries, preserved by the Arctic ice, stand as the final testament to human courage in the face of unforgiving wilderness. These men risked their lives for science and discovery, and even as they lay dying, they recorded their observations. The North Pole was finally reached by air in 1926, 29 years after the death of André's team, when Roald, Amundsen, and Umberto Nobile achieved. The Swedish inventor dreamed of using a hot air balloon instead of a hot air balloon. André, Strindberg, and Frankel are still buried on White Island, a monument to human audacity and the price of scientific progress. The ice preserved not only their bodies, but also the memory of a time when people were willing to sacrifice their lives for a glimpse into the edge of the unknown. The latest story from the Arctic is the most mysterious and controversial. Declassified Cold War archives tell of a discovery that continues to captivate researchers of unexplained phenomena and raises the question, what else lies hidden in the icy depths of our planet? In 1962, during the construction of a secret military base in northern Alaska, an incident occurred that the military tried to cover up for more than half a century. Workers from the Northland Construction Company were digging a foundation pit for a radar station when an excavator came across something amazing buried in the permafrost. At first, it looked like a typical fossil find, of a type common in Alaska. But when workers began excavating the site, it became clear this was something entirely different. According to declassified documents and witness testimony, when the remains emerged decades later, the permafrost contained the remains of a gigantic creature unlike any known animal. Official records describe it as a biological entity of unknown origin, measuring 12.5 meters, 41 feet, long. James McCormick, the bulldozer driver who first saw it, succinctly wrote in his diary, "This was not a mammoth like any we have previously discovered. Its limbs were very long for any known mammal, and its skull was abnormally long, almost like a crocodile's, but about the size of a car." What most astounded observers was the creature's size. While mammoths can grow to 4 meters, 13 feet, this creature was twice that size. Its skin had a strange texture, not woolly like a mammoth's, nor smooth like a reptile's, but covered in horn-like plates reminiscent of an armadillo's armor. Site manager Robert Henderson later recalled, "This creature had teeth as long as my arm, not like a herbivore. They were predatory teeth, razor sharp. The paws were many, many toes, each ending in a claw the size of a dagger." The discovery was immediately shrouded in secrecy. Within hours, a helicopter carrying military biologists arrived from a secret laboratory at Fort Richardson. The entire site was cordoned off, workers were placed on furlough, and management was ordered to sign 80-year non-disclosure agreements. Dr. Margaret Thompson, the military paleontologist called in to examine the find, later privately admitted, "What we pulled out of the ice didn't fit any known scientific pattern. Radiocarbon dating puts it at about 400,000 years old, but dissecting it was impossible. The skeleton was particularly mysterious. The bones were hollow like those of birds, but thick like those of an elephant. The spine had extra protrusions not found in any known vertebrates. But most bizarre of all, the skull contained cavities that served only one purpose: to house a brain the size of a human. Years later, parts of the story leaked to the press via ex-military personnel and scientists. Sergeant David Cole, who was guarding the site, claimed, "We worked 3 shifts taking samples. There were bones like we'd never seen before. Some even glowed green in the dark. The tissue samples yielded even stranger results. The DNA was partially degraded, but the remaining sequences contained patterns not found in any known organism on Earth. The protein structures were so unusual that they could not be analyzed even with laboratory equipment from the 1960s. Dr. Edward Clark, who worked on the samples in the secret laboratory, later wrote in his memoirs, "The cellular structure resembled that of organisms on Earth, but was organized according to entirely different principles. It was as if evolution had taken a completely different course." The most bizarre details concerned the alleged technology. Several witnesses reported the presence of metallic objects found near the remains, sheets of an unknown alloy that defied analysis and remained cold even when heated. Sergeant Cole described it as, "There was something that looked like a helmet, but it was made of a material we couldn't identify. It was as light as aluminum, as strong as steel, and on its surface were symbols that didn't correspond to any known writing system." Conspiracy theorists suspect the remains belonged to an alien that landed on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. Others believe they were a previously unknown terrestrial species that evolved along common lines of evolution. Skeptics offer simpler explanations. It could have been the mutilated carcass of a mammoth, or another Ice Age animal, distorted by millennia in the permafrost. The pressure of the ice might have distorted the skeleton beyond recognition. Geologist Samuel Parker, who worked at the site, suggested another idea. Perhaps these were the remains of an unknown species of ancient reptile that lived during a warmer period in Alaska's history. Mesozoic deposits in this area are poorly understood, but the size did not match any known Mesozoic or Cenozoic species. Even the largest dinosaurs rarely exceeded 15 meters in length, and most Ice Age giants were much smaller. The truth may be far less exciting than the theories. The military may have concealed the discovery not because of its bizarre nature, but simply to avoid drawing attention to a secret construction project during the height of the Cold War. In 1962, any unusual discovery near a military base was automatically classified. The frenzy of the Cold War meant that even ordinary fossil finds were kept secret when they were discovered in strategically important locations. Dr. Q. Arthur Simmons, a geologist with the U.S. Air Force, later explained, "In those years, we classified everything. The discovery of mammoth bones on a military base would attract scientists, journalists, and maybe even spies. It was easier to cover up. Some researchers suggest that similar discoveries may have occurred before, but the public never heard of them. Remote military bases, mining operations, and oil rigs, the frozen remains of prehistoric animals, were regularly found everywhere. Most of these discoveries reach scientists and become part of the public record. But what if some of them are truly beyond the scope of known paleontology? How many more secrets does Alaska's permafrost hold?" In 2019, part of the Alaska 62 incident documents was declassified, but key details remain under wraps. The official story describes an archaeological find of no scientific significance. But why, then, are most of the documents classified until 2042? "I saw the pictures of this find," former military biologist Daniel Moore said in a 2020 interview. "It wasn't just an unknown animal. It was something that challenged our understanding of life on Earth." Until these documents are declassified, The Alaskan giant will continue to generate speculation. This story reminds us that even in the age of ubiquitous information, our planet still conceals countless secrets. Perhaps the truth will turn out to be disappointingly simple: the remains of a prehistoric animal, transformed into a myth by military secrecy and human imagination. Or perhaps, deep within the Alaskan permafrost, lies something that could transform our understanding of history and life itself. The Arctic ice has become a veritable time machine, preserving the planet's history in astonishing detail. Rotifers have revealed the path to biological immortality. Otzi has unraveled the mysteries of ancient murders. Mammoths, Liuba, and Yucca have opened the door to the rebirth of extinct species. HMS Terror has become a symbol of human courage. Sasha the rhinoceros reminded us of lost worlds. And Andre's voyage showed the high price of scientific discovery. The mysterious Alaskan giant hints at secrets that could transform our understanding of life. But the climate is changing. The ice is melting faster than ever, and every year the permafrost reveals new secrets. Who knows what amazing discoveries still lurk in the frozen depths of the Arctic, perhaps answering even the most fundamental questions about our past, present, and future.